Broadcast of Almanac North is made possible by support from the lawyers of Freiberger, Buchanan, Smith & Frederick, with offices in Duluth, St. Paul, and Superior. The Northland Foundation, a northeastern Minnesota resource for grants to nonprofits, loans to businesses, and Kids Plus programs for children and youth. On the web at northlandfdn.org. Minnesota Iron Mining, ensuring a future for the communities of northeast Minnesota. We help build America every day. And the Muriel Whiteside Charitable Trust.
Coming up on Almanac North, proposed copper mines on the Iron Range promise new, high-paying jobs for the region. But non-ferrous mining opponents say those jobs could come at too steep a cost for the environment. Governor Tim Pawlenty sat down for an interview in our studio this week to talk about the state budget, the federal stimulus package, and more. These stories and the business news coming up on Almanac North. Hello, and welcome to Almanac North. I'm Eric Olson, along with Pamela Fish. Thanks for watching. It's nice to be back filling in for Darren and Julie, Pam.
Yeah, good to be here, Eric.
Plenty to talk about tonight, so why don't we get started?
All right, let's do that. Well, mining has been a way of life on the Iron Range for more than a century. While the iron mining industry is currently feeling the pain of a sour economy, the potential for non-ferrous mining jobs could help ease that sting. But some believe proposed copper mines on the range come at too high a price for the environment. This week, a bill was introduced in the legislature that mining advocates say would kill non-ferrous mining on the range. Joining us now to debate the issue is Len Anderson, a former biology teacher who has been monitoring the region's water quality for more than 40 years, and Frank Ungaro, the executive director of Mining Minnesota, who represents non-ferrous mining companies. Thanks to both of you for being with us tonight. Appreciate that. Len, I want to start with you because I want you to tell us what the intent of this legislation is that was introduced in St. Paul this week.
Well, not to take much time on this, the bare bones is that the legislation would prohibit any mine that would end up resulting in long-term water treatment after closure. And then a second component of that deals with financial assurance to make sure that our taxpayers don't get stuck with a burden like they have in many other states with this type of mining.
And Frank, you've said that this bill, if passed, would effectively kill the Polymet project, that is the one that's probably the closest to a reality, and other projects like it in copper mining on the Iron Range. How so? How would it kill those projects?
Well, it was interesting listening to Len talk about the importance of protecting the environment, because we want the same thing. All these companies are committed to meeting or exceeding all of Minnesota's strict environmental standards. Unfortunately, this bill doesn't do anything to further protect the environment. What it does do, doubly unfortunate, is essentially prohibits the state from permitting non-ferrous mining operations in the state of Minnesota. Under this language, you could not permit a Walmart parking lot in the state of Minnesota.
You mean just because of the post-cost provision?
No, the language as it's written, the way it's defined, the way it's outlined, it is essentially a ban on non-ferrous mining. At a time when Minnesota needs solid jobs that can really stimulate, bring revenue to the region, and help do it with Minnesota's strict environmental standards, Minnesota jobs.
Len, tell us, why is this bill needed? Why are these additional restrictions needed beyond what we already see in place with environmental impact statements and other permitting?
Well, this is a different kind of mining. You know, we're comfortable with taconite mining. We had a lot of experience with it. We have laws in the books that deal with taconite mining, and quite effectively. But we've got a whole new ball game with metallic sulfide mining because of the potential for acid mine drainage and all of the leachate that goes with it. And so because of that, there is a need for a little bit of fine-tuning in legislation. And we're not talking about, you know, a heavy-handed stroke here. I'm a bit surprised that Frank and I aren't both supporting this bill. This bill has a lot of good features for mining company and very little that is so oppressive that it should restrict them from mining in this state. If they can't mine without having a polluting legacy that goes on for 20 or 60 or 160 years after closure, that's not the kind of mine that we want here, and this legislation would prevent that. But if they can mine and close up shop through bankruptcy or completing the mining project in 20 years, close up shop and walk away and leave our waterways clean, there isn't one word in this bill that will slow them up.
Isn't that a big problem, Mr. Ungaro, in that you don't have much historical on your side with regard to other projects in the U.S.? Now, I understand the processes have changed and are better, but just the whole, hasn't been done here in Minnesota before, and sometimes the states, like Colorado, have been left holding large cleanup costs after a company goes bankrupt, for instance.
The technology that has advanced in hydrometallurgical processing over the last 15, 20 years is tremendous. A lot of the past practices that people point toward in other states are operations that haven't been mining since World War II, or the types of mining that aren't even being proposed here. We have a thorough environmental review process. The DNR says publicly they have a comprehensive, strict, probably second to no other state in the union, environmental review standard that will assure water quality and air quality and financial responsibility for closure. We're committed to meeting all those standards. No additional restrictions are necessary. That's all we want to do, is not change the rules of the game at the last minute. Rules that industry, environmental groups, everybody was at the table when those rules were promulgated in the early 90s.
Len, you talk about fine-tuning and that this would just do a little bit more than what we already see in regulations, but doesn't it call for setting aside a good chunk of money, and wouldn't that really hamper the efforts of some of these new operations at the outset?
That's uniquely needed for metallic sulfide mining because of their long-term legacy. You know, by your own EIS, some of the problems that will be manifest, some of the worst problems will be in 160 years after closure. And some of them will not be resolved for many hundreds of years, many of them decades. And so because of that, you get into a situation that we've seen, and I've got, you know, here 5, 10 horrible examples around the nation, but we won't bore people with that. But we get into this situation where taxpayers get stuck because that long-term legacy from that acid mine drainage, which also brings with it a whole host of toxic heavy metals.
You're talking about the waste rock, not the actual process, because that's going to be different.
Both.
But the process is going to be different this time, right?
And the process by their own EIS is producing massive amounts of waste, many of them that are toxic. And those go into the tailings basin, which is, you know, a horrible leaky mess. It's presently the old leaky LTV tailings basin. They're going to build on top of it. Then they'll have these waste heaps at the mine site, and they're all leaking, every one of them by the EIS.
Mr. Ungaro, aren't there some safeguards in place with regard to this process?
For the tailings basin?
I think, you know, Len brought up the EIS, and I think, first, it's ready to be published very soon, but it hasn't been published. When it's published, it's open for public comment. We have an open, transparent, very public, anyone can participate process. We encourage everyone to look at the draft EIS when it's published, look at the specific plans that, in this case, PolyMet has in place to assure that our air quality, which is projects will not have a problem with, and that water quality and the strict standards that Minnesota have in place will be met. All of the companies will have to put financial assurance on the table to meet any exposure that they have. The state of Minnesota requires that. They will review it annually, and as exposure grows, the financial requirement will be there to cover the cost so the taxpayers aren't holding the bag. As projects close, that will decrease, but the companies are committed, the state has the authority, and that will be covered.
I want to ask real quick, just a quick business question on this. With the bad news coming out of the range this week, again, about more closing, layoffs, is the market dynamics the same for your clients, like a Polymet, than those folks with this lousy economy that's happening right now?
I think every industry and every economy in this economy has been suffering. Clearly, metal prices have fallen significantly. Individual company stocks have declined dramatically. But the bottom line is these projects are all solid, viable. The investors have not abandoned them. They can still come in here, make a profit. That's a good thing. Every company has to make a profit, and they can do it environmentally responsibly, safe mining. You can do that here.
So then, to follow that argument, are we looking at legislation, Mr. Anderson, that could potentially kill hundreds of jobs, hundreds of millions of dollars in economic development?
You might be looking at one of Frank's quotes from this week. No. You know, I think that this legislation that's being proposed, I think if we give it a really honest look, is a jobs bill.
If you look at the language, the DNR has stated publicly that they would not be able to permit an operation with the way this bill is written. Anyone who says anything different at best is being disingenuous.
Well, that's what Representative Hausman said. We want mining to come in, but we want it done the right way. Didn't she say that?
And we want the same thing. I think, you know, if we look at the opportunity to change the global carbon footprint, we can mine in Minnesota. The demand is going to be there globally. 80% of copper in this world is still done with a smelter. To push it into a jurisdiction that's going to do it with less restrictions, like China, and send acid rain up in the air and coming down here, and to push it away from this jurisdiction where we would do it without that, I'm not sure that's environmentally responsible. We can start reducing the global carbon footprint by mining and processing here in Minnesota right now.
We can start reducing the global carbon footprint by redesigning the Polymet proposal as it stands, which destroys hundreds of acres of peat bog, which are phenomenal carbon and mercury sinks right now. They're sequestering carbon and mercury, but they're going to be destroyed in the process of this mine. But I'm not
wait
saying,
till the EIS comes out, and when the EIS comes out, they will
straight out of your documents,
everything.
Joe.
Okay.
Straight
All right.
out of Polymet
well,
documents.
Gentlemen, I sure appreciate the viewpoints here and sharing those with our viewers, but we're going to have to wrap it up at this point. And thank you for being with us. We'll be following the legislation and the progress on this.
All right,
thank you.
Good.
Thanks.